Hi, in this video I'm staying with the Bill Gates theme. In light of his involvement in influencing governments and media aggressively, I wanted to address the question who he is and what motivates him. Sometimes you hear people wondering why he would be interested in vaccinating 7 billion people and promoting a one-world government, which he publicly said, as he is already rich and can have whatever he wants. So to address this, we will have to discuss his ideology as well as paranoia, psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism. Just briefly, besides being co-founder and CEO of Microsoft until 2000, he then committed himself to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to focus on so-called philanthropy. Besides founding substantially the World Health Organization, this foundation has close links to Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, and the Gates, Microsoft, and Rockefeller Foundation seed-funded ID 2020 project, the Digital Identity Alliance, aggressively promoting worldwide highly profitable vaccinations combined with biometric ID surveillance. Interestingly, his father, Bill Gates Sr., served on the board of Planned Parenthood, a rebranded organization from the American Eugenics Society, to control human breeding. In 2015, Bill Gates Jr. gave a TED Talk where he also promoted ideas to control the world population by vaccinations. There are many ethical questions about his motives. For instance, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation funded vaccination program promoted by the WHO and the Kenyan government, which was a tetanus vaccine, was tested positive for HCG, which produces antibodies to the pregnancy hormone to sterilize unaware women. Besides these ideological motivations, I wanted to discuss what Bill Gates is afraid of, his paranoia, and whether we find signs of psychopathy and related antisocial behavior disorders, and narcissism. Briefly, these terms are rather vaguely defined. Psychopathy and sociopathy are both combined under the umbrella of antisocial disorders. Psychopathy and sociopathy reflects the nature, being born that way, versus nurture, made by society debate, where both can overlap through the issue of upbringing. Psychopathy is more severe and entails paranoia, a sixth sense to avoid harm, deception for personal gain and pleasure, lying, impulsiveness, recklessness, aggressiveness and violence, lack of empathy, remorse and guilt. So basically a serial killer would generally fall in this category. Sociopathy is similar but may not entail physical violence. And sociopaths can be very sociable, have families and friends, and be very successful in society. So typical jobs of sociopaths might be CEO, lawyers, TV hosts, and politicians. While psychopaths can be outcasts of society, sociopaths can be highly successful and highly functioning in society. Narcissists, on the other hand, show pervasive patterns of grandiosity, need for admiration and power, and exhibit a godlike complex, including fantasies of unlimited power, admiration, and brilliance, and they show signs of entitlement and arrogance. While these features also strongly overlap with sociopaths, they might be again less severe and aggressive in narcissists. Okay, let's finally get started.
Fortunately, there's very few things, and most of them are very low probability. Some big volcanic explosion.
So you see immediately from his giggles and his happy face that he really enjoys talking about these disasters. This is the first indication that he suffers from paranoia, but more than that. These even could be considered signs of psychopathy or more generally antisocial personality disorder, APD. I like to define APD by behavioral patterns which are opposite to how normal people would behave. Normal people become aroused, show dilated pupils, and an increased heart rate when they see something they like. People with APD shows the opposite. They behave extremely calm under stress and they find pleasure in cruel things and disasters. And this is exactly what shows up here. He finds pleasure in talking about disasters. His whole face is lighting up, showing happiness and cheerfulness.
Gigantic earthquake, asteroid. At least in the nuclear case, you've got to say we take it quite seriously. We budget a lot of money, have a lot of people who think about nuclear deterrence. And oh yeah, there must be a spike for World War I.
Again, giggling.
Sure enough, there it is, like 25 million. And there must be a big spike for World War II, and there it is, it's like 65 million. But then you'll see this other spike
Again, smiling, being super
that
excited,
is as large as World War II,
laughing.
right after World War I. And most people, a lot of people would say, well, what? What was that? There's two kinds of flus.
Do these maps remind you of the news of COVID-19?
And the Ebola epidemic showed me that we're not ready for a serious epidemic, an epidemic that would be more infectious and would spread faster than Ebola did. This is the greatest risk of a huge tragedy. This is the most likely thing by far to kill over 10 million excess people in a year. We don't need to invest nearly what we do in military preparedness. This is something where less than $1 billion a year on R&D, medical surveillance, standby personnel, cross-training the military so they can play a role in terms of all the logistics here. This can be done.
So we see severe signs of paranoia, all put in one pot. Nuclear explosions, earthquakes, pandemics, military surveillance. This sounds like a nightmare.
When I was a kid, the disaster we worried about most was a nuclear war. That's why we had a barrel like this down in our basement filled with cans of food and water. When the nuclear attack came, we were supposed to go downstairs, hunker down, and eat out of that barrel. Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this.
So here again we see severe signs of paranoia in the obsession with viruses and pandemics.
What are the key pieces? First is we need strong health systems in poor countries. We need a medical reserve corps. And then we need to pair those medical people with the military. We need to do simulations, germ games, not war games. Finally, we need lots of advanced R&D in areas of vaccines and diagnostics. Now, I don't have an exact budget for what this would cost, but I'm quite sure it's very modest compared to the potential harm. The World Bank estimates that if we have a worldwide flu epidemic, global wealth will go down by over $3 trillion.
So in an earlier interview, I mentioned that I see signs for Alzheimer's disease. So people might wonder, why did I say that? The brain works like a pattern recognition system, and this is also exploited now in deep learning algorithms. So you essentially correlate subtleties one can see in images and so on with learned experiences and outcomes. And this is exploited, of course, in the highly successful and thousands of year old Chinese medicine, where the doctor and healer were just by looking at facial features can deduce the health status of an individual. So my grandmother died of Alzheimer's when I was very little and we walked to school. I remember asking her when people die, and she had this very wrinkly face with the worry lines. She looked a little bit like him actually, a wrinkly face and worry and fear. And she said, when you have wrinkles everywhere. And this sort of stuck with me. And to me, this is the typical face of someone with Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's is directly linked to paranoia. So here I use system psychoanalysis, which considers illnesses and disorders not as a problem of the individual, but as a deeper issue of the family system, which includes ancestors. So for instance, family secrets such as suicides, rape can have strong effects on future generations. And with this point of view, degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia and so on are connected to desire to go back into childhood to escape difficulties of present daily life. And removing themselves from the present people with these conditions can be seen to heal their past and therefore their inner child in a way, who was traumatized by a profound event, such as war, abuse and suicide, affecting either themselves or their family systems. So with Alzheimer's patients, you often see paranoia and also the forgetfulness of present events like losing keys and so on, aggressiveness and an urge to escape, to run away. These are typical signs of someone with Alzheimer's. And I see these features in Bill Gates' face. Huge fear and paranoia, which are his drivers. And they're very powerful.
Coffee or tea?
Way more coffee.
What is your worst fear?
I don't want my brain to stop working.
When people are asked this question, I think a lot of people say that they fear that they are not of any use anymore when they are old and they can't contribute productively anymore. But he worries about his brain not working. Which brings me back to Alzheimer's, which is a neurodegenerative disease.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I'm thrilled to have Bill Gates with us this afternoon. I've wanted to do this with you for quite some time. And one of the
So here immediately Andrew Ross Sorkin caught my attention because he comes in here, fiddles around very nervously, goes up and down, but also immensely enjoys himself and doesn't give the ball immediately to Bill Gates as the main guy in this interview. I can tell that because he hardly looks at Bill Gates and he doesn't even look at the audience. So when we are looked at, this arouses the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response. We might feel compelled to look away or to flee. And while he shows these behaviors, he's enjoying the situation. So he's completely self-absorbed. So this is what I meant with psychopathic behavior. And this here caught my attention immediately.
great privileges in my life as a journalist has actually been getting to know Bill over probably the last decade now, and Warren Buffett together.
So he knows him very well over the last 10 years. So it looks like he's a Bill Gates ally in the media. And also it comes to mind that like-minded people like sociopaths and narcissists attract each other. So who's now Andrew Ross Sorkin? He's an American journalist, TV host, author, and writes on financial issues for the New York Times. He's described as super confident, self-promoting, very competitive, basically rich, famous, and extremely successful at his young age.
And every time that we spend time together, I learn so much, and I know so many of you are going to learn so much from Bill. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that Bill Gates is singularly, I would argue, the most consequential individual of our generation.
To put it positively.
I mean that.
Thank you.
What he did in the private sector at Microsoft changed the face of culture and how we live today. And what he is doing with his foundation is changing the world. I just want to give you one step.
I guess it's true.
Since 2002, and Bill and Melinda Gates have a huge role in all of this, more than 32 million lives have been saved, and so thank you for that, Bill Gates.
So let's jump right ahead.
Let me ask you a maybe tough question, and this has to do with the idea that philanthropy today often feels, or people would argue, that it credentializes people, credentializes certain people. There have been a number of reports, including in the New York Times, and you know where I'm going with this, about a handful of meetings, if not more, that you took with Jeffrey Epstein after.
So it's now about Jeffrey Epstein, the billionaire child molester and sex trafficker. And we see Bill Gates gets nervous here. He fiddles around with a water bottle immediately. Of course, he knew the question would be coming and everything, but you can't really control body language. Bill Gates was many times flying on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet to his mansions in Florida and to his private island. And this private jet is also called the Lolita Express. And there's proof that he was on this plane several times. So again, this brings me to back to the idea that shady people and like-minded people and sociopaths attract each other.
He had been convicted as a sexual offender. And I know that you have said it was a mistake, and that it was something that you wished you had not done.
So we see he's breathing very heavily, he's squinting the eyes in concentration, he's very serious, he's very still, and that could be a sign of passive aggressiveness at this moment. So also he knew the question was coming, he can't control his behavior.
In retrospect, but I'm curious now with hindsight.
And he is still fiddling around, jumping around. It's nervousness, but he's extremely enjoying himself, which I find remarkable.
Since those stories came out, what do you think the lesson of that was? And when you think about that as an experience and this credentializing idea?
Well, definitely, any people with a reputation spending time with him probably gave him an undeserved sense of, being back in the mainstream or not being a pariah. And so my doing that was a mistake. As I go about trying to raise money for global health, which, every extra $1,000 we raise for that cause saves one life. And so we are extremely resource limited. We can buy more bed nets, we can buy more vaccines.
Oh, Bill Gates' moral compass is so far off. I can't believe it. Anyway, this is a very well rehearsed answer, and he tried to push it around into something positive. But this is amazing. Okay, let's look briefly at Andrew Ross Sorkin, what else he says. It's now about the corona crisis and the economy.
The other part of it is the Federal Reserve is printing trillions of dollars, printing money like it's going out of style. I mean, and by the way, they don't even print it. They literally just press 000 on a computer. Like, that's actually how it happens.
Literally?
Literally. That's literally, Ben Bernanke once explained it.
So again, he shows happiness about something which is of distress to many people, meaning inflation, loss of savings, loss of livelihoods. So he shows the opposite behavior of a normal person would show. He's enjoying it. He also has this funny left eye. So if it were two colors, this is called heterochromia, and that is a very rare condition. In his case, it looks like his iris seems to be broken, and it appears that his pupil is elongated, like that of a cat. That makes him look rather eerie and reminds me of double-tongued people, a symbol of deception. He looks so cheery, and then he has these different eyes. So much about symbolism.
I have a lot of hope about this. I'm hopeful in one respect, which is I think that they're engaging on this topic in a way they never did before. It actually is moving the needle in terms of the conversation. You have CEOs who would have never even talked about this before, and that's amazing.
Oh, now as they talk about Black Lives Matter. I find him so hypocritical. He sits in his fancy living room, which looks like a palace, and he talks about the economy and Black Lives Matter like he knows what he's talking about.
Question is whether you think that it's going to be more than press releases, whether it's going to be more than advertising, because ultimately, and this is the thing that nobody in the business world wants to talk about, this is a political issue.
What will COVID do to our cities? Cities are the hardest hit.
Right.
And there's a lot of remote work right now, as you were saying before. What's that going to mean? The success. Many industries, about a third of American industries have been able to actually work fairly efficiently remotely. What's that going to mean to our cities?
Well, look, I worry about our beloved New York, Stephen. I worry about it.
He's worrying about it, and he has smiles on his face. He's the most unauthentic person I've seen in a long time on TV. I don't know, I can't put it in words even. So hypocritical, so unreal.
And then the last part is the president. We have an election coming up. And there's a view that he is going to spend as much money as it takes, whether he's got to send you a check with his signature on it every month from now till November to keep the vote, if you will.
To buy. I believe the word for is buy is what you're looking for.
I'm a journalist, and I try to stay straight down the center there.
It's interesting. I wouldn't call him a journalist. He just doesn't look like a journalist. And when he said, I'm a journalist, he looked down. So I don't think he thinks of himself as a journalist at all. He's just a rich kid with good connections to Bill Gates, and he has no clue what he's talking about. That's my opinion. So in summary, we talked about a lot of different things related to Bill Gates, the paranoia, psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism. And then we ended with Andrew Ross Sorkin, an ally of Bill Gates at the Financial Times. And to me, he's just a rich, competitive kid. So who is Bill Gates? Does he want to rule the world? Is he a psychopath, sociopath, or narcissist? Well, he's certainly driven by fear, paranoia, which is a strong motivator. And he certainly shows antisocial behavior. He gets pleasure out of disaster and pandemics. And I think he's a narcissist with a God complex. If you don't understand your problem, your personal problem, you often try to solve it at a much larger scale. He or someone in his family seems to have lost control, and I do think he wants to control the world. He's achieving considerable influence over governments and media through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Giving Pledge, so we have to be extremely careful. And with this note of caution, I end here, and thank you for listening, and talk to you next time. Bye.